morning, good afternoon, good evening. Somebody has dubbed 17th of November National Dzungu Day. I think it is an appropriate name because on the 17th of November 2017, the people of Zimbabwe lost their heads. When people went on the streets in their thousands to support Emerson Mnangagwa and his fellow coup plotters in staging the 2017 military coup, that was a moment of madness. The people were shouting, it's Independence Day. They genuinely believed that the military coup was going to end the dictatorship. In reality, succeeded in removing the dictator Robert Gabriel Mugabe, only to replace him with yet another dictator, Emerson Mnangagwa. It didn't take very long for the people to realize they jumped from the frying pan straight into the fire. Of course, it was madness. Zimbabwe has had the misfortune of being ruled by a corrupt, incompetent, and tyrannical Zanu PF dictatorship for the last 44 years. Albeit the last 24 years, they've managed to do it with the help of the equally corrupt, incompetent, and utterly useless MDC CCC opposition. The country's real fight these last 44 years has been to make sure that the country has got the rule of law, the freedoms and rights of all Zimbabweans are respected. That has been the number one fight. Indeed, even going back to the 1980 elections themselves, when Zanu PF left many of its operatives in the fields, and their campaigning message to the people was, if Zanu PF does not win the 1980 elections, the bush war would continue. That should have set alarm bells ringing in every Zimbabwean's mind. That we have got a regime here that cares about power and does not care about the ordinary people. The right of every citizen to a meaningful say in the governance of the country. The rule of law. These are fundamental to good governance. Yes, of course, in 1980, one could forgive the people for voting to end the dictatorship. What choice did they have? You don't argue with somebody when you're looking up the business end of an AK-47 rifle. But the people should have put their marker from that day and realize this is our biggest fight, is to make sure that we've got rule of law. We've got the freedom and rights of all the citizens valued. And they should have never lost sight of that. That should have been our number one fight. And so by 2017, when there was a factional war in Zanu PF, it was a factional war. The coup was not about anything other than a factional war. It pitted Mnangagwa and his Lacoste against Mugabe and his G40 group who were fighting for power. The people should have realized this is not their war. And if, even when the Lacoste party had staged the coup, the people should have stayed out of the streets. This is not their victory. They should have realized that Mnangagwa and his cause had not had their soul on the road to Damascus convention, turning them from the vote rigging, murderous, corrupt thugs into justice-loving Democrats. They should have realized that. The real Mnangagwa we know, and they have known, is the one who was involved in imposing the Zanu PF dictatorship all these years. Here is a video of Mnangagwa speaking, boasting about his electoral coup in 2008.
2008 patakaita ma-elections pakaposa papinda Tsvangirai ndandiri election agent ya president. Ma-results abuda tiri party headquarters vamutasa vanga vari secretary vedu ve-administration vamutasa muripi ndafona ndiri kwarusapi komogwenda kwarusapi seka ma-results achibuda kudai vanga aiwa zvako izvo Mnangagwa ndezvako endaenda kumusha ofisi vanga vabisa zvinhu zvavo zvose watofunga kuti zani yadini yaparara. President ofona zvakamira sei kati atomamira zvakaita takatodini kateda sei manje mama ndikati abvudzai baba nditaurira baba gadzirai politburo cabinet musarangarira zvimwe zivi gadzirai chi cabinet asi tangoda kuti muzive kuti 2008 ma-results abuda vamutasa vakatiza.
As a country we face a generational transition. Vana vesa vari kuma below 35, they are crying out for help. The country is in a mess. Arusuru, we know we are inheriting a mess. We know this country has been left with nothing.
I'm assuring you that starting from tomorrow, you'll see a different nation from what you have seen or read on the news about these results and everything. Where we are going ahead there, the situation will be very different. What we said to our people, they could not see with their own eyes. We are going to act as we see it fit. We are prepared to go the whole distance.
No,
In other words, our focus should have been how to end the Zanu PF dictatorship. We should not have allowed ourselves to be sidelined into believing that somehow Mnangagwa and his faction would deliver a democratic Zimbabwe just because they staged a military coup against one of their own. The fight for a democratic Zimbabwe should be our fight. Every thinking Zimbabwean, that is your fight. This was articulated recently, last year in fact, by Dr. Mumba. He was the chairperson of the SADC election observer team. This is what he had to say.
Well, thank you so much. First of all, let me be clear that the changing of any dynamic or situation in any of our African countries is a preserve of the citizens of that country, in this case, the Zimbabwean people. An election observation team goes there to support the process by observing and being able to release a statement of our observations that, for instance, in Zimbabwe, we raised several issues of transparency and also the independence of the Electoral Commission and things which happen in many other countries, you know. But at the end of the day, once we produce the report and make it available to the Zimbabwean authorities and eventually to the Zimbabwean people, it really remains the preserve of the Zimbabwean people to fight for the freedoms that they need themselves and to correct those issues that have been observed. The reason why we have multiple observation missions is to ensure that, you know, there is a comparison, you know, taking place between the SADC report and the European Union report, the African Union report, and then they can see that those issues that repeat themselves in all these reports, it's up to the Zimbabwean people. And this is where I appeal to all political leaders, not only in Zimbabwe, especially the elections that are coming in Mozambique, that are coming in South Africa, in DRC. We have to make up our minds that, look, at the end of the day, once the people in the country are given an opportunity to monitor the elections, because they also monitor, it starts not during the day of elections. They must make sure that the constitutional lacunas that can affect a good election are dealt with months before the election. And they must fight to ensure that there's a level playing field. They should never wait for the time when the election is taking place. They must also insist that the electoral commissions and the governments in those countries abide by international norms in holding democratic elections. And this fight must be more vicious before the election comes.
That I cannot overemphasize. That is at the heart of our problem. One of the problems we have had in Zimbabwe is, for the last 44 years, we have had many opportunities to implement the democratic reforms and put an end to the Zanu PF dictatorship. The last 24 years, the people of Zimbabwe have risked all to elect MDC, CCC leaders to implement those reforms. It is interesting to note that in those 24 years, including the 5 in the GNU, not even one token reform has been implemented. When we're talking about Dzungu Day, it should be remembered that it was none other than the opposition, Morgan Tsvangirai and his friends, who helped to mobilize the public to go out in their hundreds of thousands to support the military coup on the 17th of November 2017. They supported the military coup for no other reason other than that they were hoping to go into yet another GNU, as happened in 2008 to 2013, although they failed to implement even one token reform during that GNU. Not because they didn't have the chance to do so. They did. Mugabe bribed them with the tokens of high office, and the rest, as they say, is history. History has got the habit of repeating itself. At the present moment, Zanu PF has once again broken into two factions. On the one hand, there is the Mnangagwa faction fighting for Mnangagwa to extend his stay in office beyond the maximum two-term limit. He wants to change the part of the constitution that says a president should serve a maximum of 2 terms. He is being challenged by the Chiwenga faction, who in typical fashion are claiming to be defending to be standing for the to be standing for the constitution. They want to be seen as the defenders of the Zimbabwe constitution, stopping Mnangagwa changing the constitution to extend his rule. Some people have already been tempted to join that fight. Again, I emphasize, this is not your fight. Don't be fooled by Chiwenga and his followers. They have not converted. They are not Democrats. He may be waiving the constitution, but trust me, if he was to prevail and becomes the Zanu PF candidate for the 2028 elections, I can rest assure you, you will be rigging the 2028 elections. In other words, all you are fighting for is stopping one dictator only to get another. Once again, jumping from the frying pan into the fire. The fight is not to stop one dictator taking over. Our fight is to end the dictatorship. Zimbabwe is a failed state because we have failed to hold free, fair, and credible elections for the last 44 years. And the consequences of our failure is the economic meltdown. And the country has left millions of our people living in abject poverty. Millions of others have left the country as economic and or political refugees. The emphasis on ending this case of rigged elections, of ending the dictatorship, cannot be overstated. We are fighting to end the dictatorship. We should not be sidelined into fighting a side war which will only deliver, stop one dictator, only to get another. If we focus on the fight to implement the democratic reforms and guarantee free, fair, and credible elections, neither Mnangagwa nor Chiwenga will win free, fair, and credible elections. And so the nation would have got rid of the next dictator by getting rid of the dictatorship itself. And this will not only apply in 2028, but for all time. History has got a habit of repeating itself. Let's make sure that we do not repeat the madness of 17 November 2017, when all we did was removing one dictator only to get another. Removing Robert Gabriel Mugabe to get Emerson Mnangagwa. Some people have said Mnangagwa is better than Mugabe. I think that is academic. As academic as somebody talking about whether a mouse would view a cobra to be less deadly than a black mamba. Makes absolutely no difference. Those are two poisonous snakes. If a mouse finds itself cornered by one of those, it knows that it is in serious trouble. We do not want a dictator. We do not want to stop Mnangagwa staying in power beyond 2028 at the price of getting Chiwenga as the next dictator. Let's end the dictatorship. That should be our aim. That should be our focus. Thank you very much for those of you who were able to join me this afternoon. And have a good day.